The story will be told from the perspective of the main female character.
We'd been in our new home for exactly 1 week when my phone rang at 10:15 p.m. The man calling didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask how we were settling in. He just blurted out, "I forgot to disconnect the living room camera." Then he went quiet long enough for my stomach to drop. "Sophia, I am incredibly sorry to intrude like this. I was just about to delete the old security app from my phone when it pinged with a motion alert in your living room. I thought it might be a break-in, so I opened the feed. But what I saw, your father and your brother were forging documents right on your dining table. I've saved the footage for you before I officially hand over the account credentials. I saw what they did." While he kept talking, I stood in my kitchen with the phone still warm against my ear. My husband, Mark, was in the living room, and the sound of cardboard boxes being folded was the steady, rhythmic pulse of a life I thought was finally safe. But the world had just tilted. Frank, the previous owner, a man of 56 who had seemed so relieved to be done with this house, had just handed me a weapon I didn't even know I needed. Years of working as a customs agent had trained me for moments exactly like this. When a breach occurs, you don't panic. You contain the damage. You assess the threat. Then you neutralize it. Before we dive into how I dismantled their scheme, I'd love to know who is joining me today. Drop a comment with where you're listening from. It's always a reminder that no one has to face these battles alone. I didn't cry. I didn't demand answers from the empty air. My anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical, like a balance sheet that wouldn't settle. My father and my brother, the people I had been a silent investor for since I turned 18, had finally, irrevocably overdrawn their account of my loyalty. I grabbed my keys and left a note for my husband. It was something vague about a late-night call from the port. It was a lie. But in my line of work, you learn that the first report is never the full picture. I met Frank at a 24-hour diner on the edge of town. The smell of burnt coffee and industrial floor cleaner felt more honest than the rot I was about to witness. Frank looked like he hadn't slept in days. He slid a tablet across the laminate table, his hands shaking just enough to be noticeable. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The video loaded with a grainy hum. There they were. My father, 64 years old, and my younger brother, 26. They were standing in my new living room, the very space where I had planned to host our first family Thanksgiving. My father was holding a manila folder, his posture stiff with a false sense of authority. My brother was lounging in my new armchair, a smirk on his face that I had spent 20 years funding. "She won't know," my brother said, his voice clear through the speaker. "She's at the border for another 4 weeks. By the time she checks the title, the funds will be moved." My father hesitated. For a heartbeat, there was a flicker of what I hoped was guilt, but it was just greed. $175,000 is a lot to pay back, he muttered. My brother laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the diner's quiet. "It's not a loan, Dad. It's an inheritance advance. She's strong. She'll recover." I watched my father sign my name. He didn't even hesitate. He traced the loops of my signature with the precision of a man who had practiced for this. They were borrowing $175,000 against the equity of my home to cover my brother's gambling debts. My brother even mentioned a $40,000 management fee he was keeping for himself for arranging the private lender. I closed the laptop and handed it back to Frank. I didn't feel broken. I felt sharpened. My compassion for them had been a luxury they had exploited for years. And tonight, I was filing for bankruptcy on their version of family. This wasn't revenge. It was accounting. I sat in my car in that dark parking lot and flipped open my laptop. I didn't call them, and I didn't send a single angry text message. Instead, I logged into our shared bank accounts and changed every single password. I revoked the emergency power of attorney I had given my father years ago. I placed a fraud alert on my credit and flagged the pending mortgage application with a notice of security breach. They weren't going to be shocked by what they had done. They were only going to be shocked that I had stopped playing along. By the time the sun started to rise over the harbor, my laptop was glowing with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of cold facts, numbers, and quiet payback. Later that morning, I walked through the empty rooms of my new house. The sound of my footsteps on the floorboards felt hollow, matching the empty space in my chest. For 33 years, I had been the reliable one. I was the daughter whose success was only celebrated because it provided a safety net for everyone else. Now, I realized my role hadn't been a daughter or a sister at all. I was just a resource they had been strip mining for decades. I remembered back when I was 11 and my brother was only 7. I had saved up my allowance for months to buy a specialized science kit. When I finally brought it home, my brother threw a huge tantrum because he wanted a new video game. My father didn't tell him to wait. He took my science kit back to the store and used the refund to buy that game for him. "You're smart, Sophia," he told me with that practiced smile of his. "You don't need a kit to be successful. He needs the win. Family helps family." That became the official policy. My strength was never my own. It was an asset to be handed out to the weaker members of the family. When I joined the customs agency, my father's emergencies started happening all the time. There were medical bills that insurance supposedly didn't cover and property taxes on his house that were suddenly due. I never asked him to pay me back. I thought I was buying love. Now, I realized it had just been a subscription where I paid the bill while they enjoyed the service. The psychological reason for their cruelty was actually pretty simple. In my line of work, we call it a systemic breach. But in psychology, it's the trap of normalized cruelty. My father didn't see himself as a thief. He saw himself as someone who just redistributed wealth. Because I was strong, they believed I had an infinite capacity to take a loss. They had spent years making it normal that my survival was guaranteed, which meant my resources were basically theirs for the taking. To them, stealing $175,000 wasn't a crime. It was just a withdrawal from an account they felt entitled to manage. A text from my father popped up at 2 p.m. "Your brother told me you're having some trouble with the accounts," he wrote. "Let's talk it out like a family." I didn't reply. I was too busy watching the digital walls I had built around my money hold firm. Then my brother called. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up, keeping my recorder running the whole time. "What is your problem?" my brother snapped. He didn't even say hello. He went straight to the attack. "I put in weeks of work to get that $175,000 line of credit for you. Now you've frozen everything. I have bills to pay. That $40,000 profit is mine. I earned it by managing the deal while you were playing soldier at the border." I leaned back in my office chair, staring out at the Charleston harbor. My grip on the phone was loose, and my pulse stayed steady. "I never asked for a loan," I said, "and I certainly didn't authorize my signature on a mortgage application." My brother scoffed, his voice dripping with that practiced gaslighting of his. "See, this is what that border duty does to you. You come back and you think everyone is a criminal. Dad was trying to protect your future. We're family. We share the load. You've become so cold, so transactional. It's pathetic. You're sitting on all that equity while the rest of us struggle to keep our heads above water." He wasn't shocked by what he had done. He was only shocked that I had finally stopped being his personal vault. I didn't argue with him. I didn't try to explain the concept of identity theft to a man who saw crime as a family favor. I simply told him I was willing to meet to straighten out the paperwork so he could get his money. I could almost hear his greed salivating through the phone. I called Megan, a specialized attorney who understood that in situations like this, blood wasn't thicker than water. It was just a biological excuse for theft. We met in a glass-walled office that looked out over the historic district. She didn't offer me any comforting words or pity. Instead, she offered me evidence. "The signatures on the mortgage are forged, Sophia," Megan said, sliding a thick folder across her desk toward me. "They didn't go through a traditional bank. That would have taken months. Instead, they targeted a predatory private lender, a hard money firm that deals in high-interest bridge loans. These lenders only care about the collateral. They promised a 14-day payout because they had your house as a backstop and a forged signature from a federal agent to make the risk look safe. But they didn't just stop at the house. My investigators found a second filing. My brother had used my name to secure another high-interest private loan using my mother's heritage jewelry as collateral. He had already pocketed $40,000 of that as a management fee. They had turned my entire life into a liquidation sale. I rubbed my eyes, trying to find even a small amount of regret, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a family crisis anymore. It was a hostile takeover. Megan drafted a formal notice, but we didn't serve it at my father's house. I wanted to meet them on neutral ground. Invite them to the title office at the municipal building, Megan suggested. Tell them you're there to sign over the final release for the $175,000. We need them in a place where the records are official, and there are cameras everywhere. I sent a text to the family group chat, meeting at the municipal building Wednesday at 11 a.m. to finalize the paperwork. Be there if you want the money. My father hearted the message within seconds. My brother followed up with a text that said, "About time, sis." The day before the meeting, Megan called me back into her office. She didn't look like an attorney anymore. She looked like an executioner. "It's worse than the jewelry and the house, Sophia," she said. Her voice dropped into that low frequency reserved for news that changes your life forever. My brother had broken into my home office and stolen copies of the sensitive financial records and personal identity information I used to keep my federal security clearance. He didn't just steal my money. He hijacked my professional reputation. He used my credentials to vouch for his shady transactions, tricking the monitoring systems into thinking this was the legitimate income of a government employee. He had established a shell company named Coastal Solutions and listed me as the sole owner and chief executive officer. My digital signature had been forged on documents that authorized the movement of nearly $285,000 over the last 6 months. It wasn't just gambling debt. My brother was laundering money for a private lending group to clear his losses. And because my name was on the charter, I was the one the government would come for when the audit hit. I was the one who would be led away in handcuffs, while he enjoyed his $40,000 fee. I stared at the witness line on the incorporation papers. There it was, my father's signature. He hadn't just looked the other way. He had actively helped with a scheme that could land me in a federal prison for 20 years. He knew the risks. He understood my job required a clean record. Yet, he had signed that paper, effectively offering up my freedom to keep his favorite son from facing the consequences of his own choices. This was the discovery that changed everything. This was the moment the bridge wasn't just burned, it was wiped off the map. You don't negotiate with people who are willing to trade your life for their comfort. They hadn't just overdrawn my bank account. They had targeted my future and pulled the trigger. They had turned our family bond into a death warrant. I looked at Megan and told her to loop in the federal investigators I knew at the Bureau. If they wanted a federal case, I was going to give them one. The municipal building was a maze of gray hallways and the sharp smell of floor wax. It was a cold, sterile place that fit perfectly with my plan. I got there early, standing next to Megan. The federal agents weren't in the room with us. They were sitting in a black SUV down the street, wearing headsets and listening to every single word through the wire I had hidden on me. This wasn't just a meeting. It was a sting. My heart was beating at a steady 60 beats per minute. I wasn't there as a daughter. I was the bait in a federal trap. My father and my brother walked in 5 minutes late. My brother was wearing a designer shirt that probably cost $550, most likely paid for with the fee he had stolen from my inheritance. He looked smug, leaning back in his chair with the easy confidence of a man who thought he was moments away from a big payday. My father followed him, fixing his tie and trying to act like a protective head of the family. He actually had the nerve to smile at me. "Glad we could settle this, Sophia," he said. "Family should always handle things internally." I didn't smile back. I looked at Megan, and she placed a tablet in the middle of the table and hit play. The video from Frank's living room filled the screen. The sound was perfectly clear. They watched themselves talk about my recovery and taking an inheritance advance. They heard my brother laugh about me being stuck at the border and saw my father's steady hand forge my name. When the video ended, the silence in the room was heavy enough to crush your lungs. My father's face went from greedy to a sickly, pale gray. My brother's confidence disappeared instantly, and his foot started tapping nervously under the table. "You were spying on us," my father whispered, his voice cracking like old paper. I looked at him with no emotion, the same way I would look at a suspicious shipping manifest at work. "I wasn't spying," I replied. My voice was calm and lethal. "I was securing my property. You were the ones who decided to commit a crime in my living room." Suddenly, his mask of being the strong father fell apart. He slumped in his chair and then slid out of it until he was kneeling on the floor. "Sophia, please," he begged. His eyes were wet with a performance I didn't believe in anymore. "Think of the family name. Think of our honor. We'll pay it back. Don't destroy your brother over a mistake. He's all I have left." Looking at him shaking on the floor, I finally saw the truth about him. This was just an illusion of power coming from an empty wallet. For my whole adult life, he had acted like the pillar of this family. But that position was a luxury he had been renting with my money. He wasn't a leader. He was just a tenant in a life he couldn't afford without me. Without my resources to prop up his ego, he wasn't a father. He was just an accomplice to a fraud. My brother didn't beg. He snapped, his face twisted with rage. "You think you're so much better than us because of that badge? You're a traitor to your own blood." I didn't even flinch. I pushed a manila folder across the table toward them. Inside was a federal summons for money laundering and a notice that the government was seizing the assets he had hidden in Coastal Solutions. "I already did something for the family," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "I stopped the rot. The rest is in the hands of the United States Attorney." I stood on the balcony of my house overlooking the Charleston harbor, the early morning sun painting the water in shades of bruised purple and gold. The salt air felt different now. It wasn't heavy with the humidity of a buried secret, but light with the clarity of a fresh start. They weren't shocked by their own betrayal. They were only shocked that I had finally stopped paying the bill for it. The legal battle ended quickly. The $175,000 mortgage was officially canceled, and the heritage jewelry, my mother's emerald earrings and the gold necklace she wore at her wedding, were returned to my safe. My father and my brother didn't end up in orange jumpsuits, but their names were put on a federal registry for financial fraud. Their reputations were completely destroyed. My brother was forced to pay back every penny of the $40,000 he had taken, a debt that would take him the rest of his life to pay off. I stood on the balcony of my house later, looking over the water. The air felt light and clear. For 33 years, I had been the reliable daughter who apologized for her own success so that others wouldn't feel small. But that version of me died in that meeting room. I realized then that letting go of blood relatives wasn't mean. It was an act of survival. DNA is just a blueprint, but family is a contract of respect. When they forged my signature, they broke that contract forever. With Megan's help, I used the money from the case to start the Sophia Guard Fund. It's a foundation that provides free legal help to service members whose money is messed with while they are deployed at the border or overseas. I didn't want my story to just be about a closed bank account. I wanted to build something to protect the next person who is away on duty and can't see the betrayal happening in their own home. This house is finally quiet now. The ghosts are gone. I don't need a hidden camera to watch my back anymore because I finally learned how to defend myself. I'm no longer a line on someone else's balance sheet. I'm a woman who found her worth in her own truth. If this story moved you, please share your thoughts in the comments and let me know where you're listening from. We tell these stories so nobody has to deal with this alone. We have many more stories to share, real, hard, human ones. If you'd like to keep walking this path with us, subscribe and stay for the next one. Let's keep going together.